Didier Reynders, European Commissioner for Justice, with an eye on the transatlantic relationship between these technological powers, including the United States. Commissioner, it's great to see you here in the nation's capital. Welcome to Bloomberg.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to come.
I don't know your thoughts on this or if this has impacted your life at all today, but this failure on behalf of CrowdStrike is renewing a conversation about something that you talk a lot about, and that's strong transatlantic regulations. Would they prevent something like this?
It's possible. The first impact today is a delay of 3 hours to go back to Brussels. I was waiting in Washington before to have a plane today. So that's a real issue. The second element that proves that we have an interconnected world and the World Wide Web, it's not new. It's a very clear signal. We are working with the same tools and we are working with the same kind of approach as with those tools. So we need to try to implement more and more the same approach, the same rules. It's the reason why we try to work on common rules. This morning I had with the Secretary of Commerce, Raimondo, the possibility to organize a first review after 1 year of a new so-called data privacy framework, so the exchange of data between the EU and the US. And we need to continue to work on many other technological issues to be sure that we have the same approach. And that proves again that also as we have a failure, we need to work together.
Well, I also wonder if this raises a question of whether there needs to be more competition in the cybersecurity space. The fact that an outage that emanates from one company in CrowdStrike could have these kind of global ramifications. Is that not problematic in and of itself, that one company could be such a linchpin for so many things?
It's also a problem, and you know that we have a competition policy in Europe, like you have in the US, to try to fight against that, but we have tried to do more. We have now new regulations about the digital world, and we have the DSA, Digital Services Act, but also a Digital Market Act to open the market, to give an access to more players. It's a real challenge to be sure that it's impossible for the big techs to block the entire system and to reserve different kind of activities for them without a real possible access for mid-size or small-size companies. And you know, when there is a startup, immediately after you will have a news on your channel that the startup is taken over by a big tech. So we try to organize a better competition in that. But again, we need to do that in a good cooperation with all the actors sharing the same values and the same approaches, the like-minded partners. We are doing that with many partners like Canada, like UK, like Japan, like South Korea, of course, between the US and EU. And you spoke about the transatlantic relation. It's what we try to do. I'm impressed by the acceleration of the common approach. We have discussed during 2 years to organize a new process about the data exchanges, about privacy, in fact. What kind of balance between privacy and security, individual approach, individual rights, and a collective security. And all the time, it's a real difficult issue. But at the end, 1 year ago, it was possible to conclude the negotiations. And this morning, I was looking on television to have some information about Milwaukee and the discussion yesterday.
We can tell you a little bit about that.
But I saw for the first time an advertising about the iPhone. And to say with Safari, you are protecting your privacy. I don't know if it's true. But what is very interesting to me is to see a big tech organizing a communication with a reference to the privacy. It's quite new. I'm sure that there are many citizens in the US, many consumers, more and more concerned about their privacy. Like also, like you said, more concerned about competition. How it's possible to have such a huge failure at the worldwide level with one company?
Well, it's worth noting in this case, this was not an attack.
No.
This was born of an update. And I wonder if, from your view, that makes it easier or more difficult to control if there were stronger transatlantic regulations.
No, I'm sure that it's a technical failure, of course, when you are looking to that. But what is very impressive is to see that with one company at work in different kind of sectors, you have so many difficulties everywhere in the world. So maybe competition will be a real reaction. But more than that, we need to work more together. To try to have common rules. What we have tried to do about privacy and to protect the personal data is one thing, but we need also to work together to open the market. What you said about a sort of monopoly of one company or a very small number of companies that work in such a sector of high tech, it's impossible to continue with that. We need to open more and more the market. And it's what we try to do at the European level. It's very recent. The new regulations into force in some months, in fact. And now we try to move more and more with a better competition in this field.
Well, we, of course, just came from Milwaukee. We could do a little bit of catching up on that. I was there on the floor when J.D. Vance accepted the vice presidential nomination. He talked about big tech. He's for little tech. He has a Silicon Valley background. He has had praise in the past for the chair of the FTC here in the U.S., Lina Khan, and efforts around antitrust. So as you talk about working together, would it be just as easy for Europe to work with a Trump-Vance administration as this Biden-Harris administration? What do you see changing depending on the outcome of this election?
But we have had to do that some years ago. I was more at the national level at the time, but we had many bilateral meetings with the Trump administration. So, of course, it will be a choice of the American voters. So we'll work with one of the other administration. I know that it will be quite difficult, but to be concrete, what we have tried to organize about the privacy, I started the discussions with the former administration, the Trump administration, before to go to an agreement with the new one. It will be difficult, but I'm sure that what will be important is to learn more about the European Union and Europe. I've seen some declarations of our possible vice president.
Yeah.
I'm sure that we will be very happy to receive him and to try to explain what is it, the European Union, what is a single market, a huge market of lots of...
So you don't think he understands properly?
But it's a question of knowledge about the real situation. We have a huge market. You need to understand that. We have a real competition on such a market. And we have a huge democratic process. Yesterday, it was the re-election of the President of the European Commission. But to be elected as President of the European Commission, you need to be proposed by the 27 member states, the governments, but then you need to reach a majority in the European Parliament with 720 members of the Parliament. So it's a real democratic process. And we need to explain that maybe more to some leaders or possible leaders in the US. But for the moment, we are in discussion with the Biden administration and we'll continue to do that.
Obviously, to your point, you've already lived through a Trump presidency. We all did, so there might not be that many surprises. But does the isolationist bent in this Republican Party, which has evolved a bit since Donald Trump served his first term, does that bring different challenges for Europe?
But we need to continue to work on a strategic autonomy of the European Union. So we have a very strong relationship between the US and the EU, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to invest more in defense, in our own security and so on. But then we need also to convince our partners that we have common interest. If you look to the situation in Ukraine, it's not only a war of Russia against Ukraine, it's against our values, our shared values, democracy, freedom. It's very important to be concerned by that. And when you look to the recent news and that you see that a US journalist is condemned to 16 years in jail, it's quite important to understand that it's not only a war against Ukraine, of course, it's first of all that, but it's a war against our values in the EU, but also in the free world, I will say. And if you look to the situation and the repercussion in the US, it's very important to continue to support Ukraine, what we are doing with a huge financial support. You know that from the EU and the member states, it's more than $160 billion that we have provided since the beginning of the war for military support, financial support, humanitarian, but also the refugees. And we'll continue to do that. And we'll continue to see if it's possible one day to go to a peace process, but on the basis of the request of Ukraine. And I'm hoping that it will be possible with the next US administration, one of another. We need to understand that we have the same concerns. And again, the condemnation of a US journalist, it may be a good reminder for many US citizens that it's not only EU or Ukrainian situation, it's a situation for a large part of the world.